Hello, class. My name is Irina, and the topic that I chose for this project is, are economic sanctions ethical? I would like to consider Russia as an example in this case. On this graph, you can see that Russia now is the leading country that is being exposed to over 14,000 different type of sanctions that were imposed on it. So most of those sanctions were triggered after the Russian invasion in Ukraine back in February 2022. But some of the sanctions, around 2,700 of those, they were originally imposed during probably the Russian invasion in Crimea back in 2014, and some maybe even before, for some of their government policies that were not accepted by the Western countries. What are economical sanctions? Economical sanction is a popular modern non-violent tool to pressurize the target government to change its policies and the course of action. They consider it as an alternative to war, but this option doesn't come without collateral damage that we will consider and investigate later in this presentation. So the main three major clusters of sanctions, I would say, are trade sanctions. These are basically all the restrictions on exports, imports, some arm embargoes, or full trade embargoes. The other type are travel bans. So basically they restrict the traveling of the elite, or they put sanctions on, the airline companies. And so basically it's restriction of the population of that country to move freely, to move around the world. And the other, the last part are the most important, I guess, are financial sanctions. Those include the country's asset freezes, restrictions on financial transactions, and access to trade markets, and some currency controls. So the podcasts that I looked at were three of them that I actually enjoyed watching, and I recommend if you would like to, learn in more detail. The first one is the Top Talk Presents the Economic Sanctions Ethical, and the other two are basically the interviews with experts regarding how Russia is avoiding sanctions, or how the sanctions are effective, or how they are not effective. So the main points that I would like to emphasize are, the first one would be the sanctions are not harming the government as much as they're harming the people. So they are negatively affecting the most vulnerable, poor class, that don't have much resources, that don't have the ability to avoid the sanctions, don't have the ability to, pay extra money for something that becomes more expensive, or something that becomes more difficult to get. So those are the most vulnerable category of citizens. So also at this point, what's happening in Russia is that a lot of people that have funds, that have resources, that are still young age, they leave the country, they go look for other opportunities, and so they will find their way out of this. But the poor and people with less resources, they will struggle. They will have to stay and take all the consequences of the sanctions. Also, the main point here is that they are harming the people, but at the same time, the effectiveness of sanctions is not that achievable. It's not that easily achievable. So the effectiveness is sort of questionable. So governments usually they don't respond to sanctions the way they are expected to do. Some governments they have different priorities and view of the world. So they have different geopolitical goals. At the same time, not all members participate, as we can see in the case of Russia, that kind of the world is split between Western civilizations and kind of Eastern and Middle Eastern. So they don't have unified, goals, and they don't follow, and some countries are not following, and they're more friendly to Russia at this time. And it's so difficult also to isolate Russia as Russia is being so involved in the global economy. So another point, the most important one, is are sanctions ethical? And all the videos they talk about how sanctions are harming people more than they're harming the government, and how the diplomacy is so important, that everybody needs to try to negotiate before they really impose any sanctions or go to war in the case. So by putting sanctions, it's something very easy. It's a non-violent way of pressurizing governments and people, but a lot of support needs to be placed to help these people that are being sanctioned, that are taking the consequences of being sanctioned. So a study, I put a little note here that the study done by Robert Pop found that only 4% of sanctions succeeded in gaining concessions from the sanction state, which is, I would say, close to the truth. And then also one of what was in the video, the first video that I looked at, is that US sanctions have harmed millions of people and led to death count that comes to the most of the wars of the last 2 decades. So in this particular scenario, that people look at sanctions as it's kind of difficult to measure the consequences of sanctions. It's difficult to measure. They are not immediate harm. They are spread out. And this is kind of like discounting the effects of the sanctions in comparison to the real effects of the war. When you can evaluate the death rate, you can evaluate right away the consequences of the action. So in another 2 interviews with experts that I looked at, basically, the main point of sanctions, of course, as we know, is to decrease the need of Russian government to finance the war that they are involved in now. So how the people are suffering? All the resources that Russia has are going towards military spending. So all other civilian economies, civilian businesses are deprived of the resources. Also, as we mentioned, not all countries participate. So Russia is still able to get the funds, not from the West, by exporting its crude to Asia and Middle East and Latin America. So Russia is still able to keep the profits at a level, acceptable for Russia to continue the war. So the West also is imposing sanctions to kind of punish the whole population of Russia. And this is something I would not agree with, that you cannot, punish people and try to make all people responsible for the actions of the government. The pressure on the general public in Russia is very strict. So people are not revolting. They used to at the beginning, but then they're being persecuted, they're being imprisoned, detained, and it's not that easy. And their position there is not really as strong to make a change at this time. So in this here we can see that how Russia is able to still maintain the profits from selling its oil. So the oil now is being sold, let's say it's one of the examples, the oil is being sold and shipped across the world and sold to India, and India exports some of it, not all, some of it to Germany. So here we have the ethical standards of the countries that are not involved. So basically they are considering their national interests and their national, prosperity more than the global good. And Germany at the same time, or other Western countries or European countries, they are buying the oil from India or China, knowing that that oil is coming from Russia. The same thing that I talked about the oil. So here we can see how small companies are being able to help Russia to avoid sanctions. So basically in the first graph here, it shows how the microchips are traveling from Germany to Kazakhstan to its subsidiary there, and then it's being sold to Russia, since we can sell from Kazakhstan, but we cannot sell from Germany. But that company that's in Germany and Kazakhstan, they are owned by the same couple who are Russians. And so this way Russia is able to avoid and get microchips from Germany. The same thing here is with the drones. They buy drones from China. They are sold to Netherlands. There is a company, like a Chinese subsidiary or something, and then they sell it to Kazakh company that after that it goes back to Russia. So the small companies, they are concentrating on getting their profits, and nobody is looking at the whole picture of following the sanctions. It's very difficult to evaluate, to prosecute everyone who violates sanctions. It's totally impossible. So all the small companies, they will, keep doing the business to grow their profits and their interests. So here I would like to talk about Russia and the global economy, why it's easy to avoid sanctions. Russian corruption levels are high, so the sanction evasion is something normal, and all the neighboring countries are helping Russia because they would like to be in good terms with Russia. They cannot go against Russia. We see an example with Ukraine, and a lot of them just do it because of the pure benefit they get, funds they get from Russia, or by being close to Russia, they want to have a good relationship with this country. So Russia's nature of business is mostly that it's the country of exports of crude oil, um, natural resources, which is very difficult to substitute and to find another supplier for that. Because a lot of Western world depends on Russia, depends on its oil, and so they just badly need to still get those resources. And already mentioned that Russia is being one of the main players of the global economy, and how a lot of other countries are still supporting Russia and still want to do business with Russia. So the main ethical dilemma faced here is that how sanctions impact civilians. So they impact civilians of all the countries, not just the sanctioned ones. So they expect that for citizens to suffer in order to bring end to this war. So, and I would like to see, like, if it's ethical or fair to punish all the people for wrongdoings of the government. I think that sanctions policies follow deontology, since they don't look at the global good. They don't look at the wellness of the society and what impact the sanctions bring to the majority of the people. They just punish for the wrongdoing of the act. So in this case, they just try to punish Russia for doing the war thing. Basic human right violation would be another ethical dilemma. So sometimes during those sanction periods, country is deprived from necessities that are vital for people in the country. I can say now that Russia is deprived of some of the medicine, and people are struggling finding those medicines. Russia is now trying to produce those substitutes, but it takes time, and it takes money and time to develop the substitutes and test them, and analysis of the product. And at this time, they just want to create a product, and a lot of tests are not performed, and they are just getting approved without really investigating how effective it is, how safe it is. So, and people are really can get harmed. So the gap also between rich and poor is becoming bigger. Businesses are leaving the countries. The employers are leaving the countries that were helping other people to get employed, to be employed. All these businesses that closed in Russia, so many people ended up being unemployed. So all those are affecting, and diminishing the level of living in Russia. So sanction evasion is basically a violation of the international law. So you're supposed to abide by the law, but a lot of players are all just following and pursuing their personal national interests, and in this case, the sanctions become not effective. So small companies, they're just doing as everybody's doing. I want to get my profits. They have their own world of, to manage as their company. They don't want to look at how if I follow the sanctions, what is it there for me? And so a lot of people just, everybody is violating sanctions. Why should I, um, not do it? So why I chose this topic, in general, as a Russian, I was interested in politics of my country. My first bachelor's degree back in Russia was international economics. And so I'm interested always in economics and politics. And the sanctions actually are affecting me as a Russian citizen. I have my family there, my relatives, and they are all being affected by these economic sanctions. Even for me to fly to Russia, it's more complicated now. You need to take it, and then it takes longer. It's not as easy as it used to be when we had the direct flight from Moscow. After looking more into this matter, I realized how sanctions are really harmful for the civilians, how they negatively affect poor and people with uh, some extra needs and with legal resources. And I also realized how diplomacy and negotiations are important. This is basically, I would say that the president or the diplomat, they need to involve in the working out these situations before the actual wars or sanctions or any conflicts occur.